I want to start by introducing the term Amrita. Amrita is a Sanskrit word which translates as nectar bestowing immortality. This is illustrated very well in a story in Hindu mythology which is entitled The Churning of the Primordial Cosmic Ocean of Milk, which some of you might have come across, some of you might not. The gods and the demigods agree to churn the cosmic ocean of milk in order to attract Amrita, the nectar of immortality, which is an allegory for ultimate wisdom. They agreed to share the nectar between them. In order to do this, they used a mountain called Mandara. Now you have to imagine this in your minds, okay? So Mandara is used as a churning rod, and the divine serpent Vasuki acts as the rope. The gods hold the tail of Vasuki and the demigods the head, and take turns to pull it this way and that. But the weight of the mountain causes it to sink. So Vishnu then dives to the bottom of the ocean as Kurma, the tortoise, which holds the mountain on its back, thus stabilising the churning process. The very first thing that comes out is halahal, a deadly poison which Shiva drinks and holds in his throat, thus saving the world and himself from certain destruction. In some depictions of Shiva, he is shown with a blue throat to indicate the poison, and a cobra wrapped around his throat to indicate the poison being prevented from reaching the rest of his body. One of Shiva's many names is Nilakanta, blue-throated. Various other items are churned out, such as a wish-fulfilling tree, a wish-fulfilling cow, a white horse, a white elephant, the goddess of wealth and wine, and finally Dhanavantari, the divine physician with the vessel of Amrita in his hands. And of course all these things have got things written about them, but we're not going into that. So all of these things were shared out between the gods and the demigods, apart from the Amrita, which through an act of trickery by Vishnu, can you believe it, was denied the demigods, so they didn't get the Amrita. The story represents the spiritual endeavours of man for gaining immortality through concentration, withdrawal of senses, control of desires, and practice of austerities and asceticism. The gods represent the pleasure principle and the senses in ourselves, and the demigods, sometimes called demons, they represent the pain principle and negative thoughts and impulses. When one is seeking immortality through spiritual practice, one has to integrate and harmonise the positive and negative aspects of one's personality and put both energies for the common goal. The ocean of milk is the mind or human consciousness. The mind is often compared to an ocean, with the thoughts and emotions being the waves. Mandara, the mountain, represents concentration. The word Mandara means steady mind and a single line, so holding the mind steady in one line, which is possible only during mental concentration. The tortoise, which holds up the mountain, stands for the withdrawal of senses into oneself as one practices mental concentration, meditation or contemplation. The great serpent Vasuki stands for desire. Desires are compared to a 1,000-headed serpent. The serpent used in the churning of the ocean denotes that the gods and demigods held desire, in this case for immortality, as a rope, and churned the mind with the help of concentration and the withdrawal of the senses. So this is all about control of desire. The poison represents suffering and pain we undergo at the beginning of spiritual practice, when the mind is subjected to intense churning by opposing forces. The first thing that comes out of the process is suffering and inner turmoil. Annie Besant wrote, "You must learn endurance because of those trials that will come raining down upon you, in order that your past karma may work itself out in brief space, that you may be ready to serve." And this puts me in mind of HPB's words that somebody else has already said. "There is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe." The various objects that came out of the ocean during the churning stand for psychic or spiritual powers that come to the seeker as they progress on the path. But they should only be used to help others, not for selfish gain. Lastly, pride and egoism are the last hurdle one has to overcome Yes, that's correct. Sorry. Lastly, pride and egoism are the last hurdle one has to overcome in spiritual life before realising self-realisation. This is why the demigods lost their right to the Amrita. Next, in Norse mythology, that's my favourite mythology, there is a world tree, Yggdrasil, which symbolises the common axis on which the 9 realms of existence are placed. At the top is an eagle with a falcon between its eyes, which helps to keep an eye on all the worlds and report back to Odin. But at the base of the tree is the serpent Nidhugg, representing the chaotic energy of the underworld. A squirrel called Ratatosk runs up and down the trunk of the tree, being a busybody and passing insults between the serpent and the eagle. Ratatosk could represent life and consciousness and or the restless mind, but it spans the height and depth of existence. It is also pictured as a drill which can bore through the densest matter. Never seen a squirrel do that on the trees locally, have you? In the Nordic poems, the Eddas, it is related how Odin sought the bardic mead concealed in the depths of a mountain. He enlisted the aid of the squirrel to penetrate the rock, and the guise of a serpent. With the help of the squirrel, Odin entered through the borehole as a serpent. Once inside, Odin persuaded the daughter of the giant Suttung, who had the mead hidden in his underground domain, to give him a drink of it, and thus he gained wisdom. And apparently this is an oft-repeated theme, the divine seeking the mead in matter, gaining and learning from it before returning to supernal worlds. And it is said, is it not, something like this, that monads, the sparks of the divine, come into physical existence to gain experience, to return to the divine. Now there's an event which is related in various mythologies when a ray of solar essence descends to rouse into activity the mind of the as yet unthinking humans to be. In one version of the event, the serpent of Eden urges Eve to partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now Eve is always blamed for this, isn't she? But it was a necessary action. Lucifer, the bright and beautiful angel, was a light bringer who defied the Elohim, the gods. And in Greek mythology it is Prometheus, and in Norse mythology it is Loki. Both those two bring the divine fire from the realm of the gods for the sake of humanity, representing the awakening of nascent intelligence. Next, a bit about Soma. HPB says in The Secret Doctrine that astronomically Soma is the moon, But in mystical phraseology, it is also the name of the sacred beverage drunk by the Brahmins and the initiates during their mysteries and sacrificial rites. The soma plant is a Asclepias acida, which yields a juice from which the mystic beverage, the soma drink, is made. This is still HPB. The real property of the true soma was to make a new man of the initiate after he is reborn, namely once he begins to live in his astral body. The partaker of the soma finds himself both linked to his external body and gets away from it in his spiritual form. The latter, freed from the former, soars for the time being in the ethereal higher regions, becoming virtually as one of the gods, and yet preserving in his physical brain the memory of what he sees and learns. Plainly speaking, soma is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, forbidden by the jealous Elohim to Adam and Eve, lest man should become one of us. Interestingly, when HPB writes of the early days of development, she writes, "That which was natural in the sight of primitive man has become only now a miracle to us, and that which was to him a miracle could never be expressed in our language." Anyway, this is me now. Whatever the facts are about the modern day availability of soma, because I've heard somebody saying, that people take soma, it seems certain that it would only help a person towards enlightenment if they had already, through self-effort, reached a very high level of consciousness. Now we have gone full circle here because the Hindus call soma the wine of immortality, Amrita. So all these things that we're talking about here, all these things that people imbibe, they're all pretty much the same thing. So that which was churned out of the ocean is like the same as soma. It symbolises the replacement of commonplace sense pleasures by divine bliss. In the tantric scriptures it says that well concealed and attainable only by great effort is a subtle bindu, the phase of the moon representing nirvana, and amakala, its nectar dripping phase. In tantric yoga it is said that the moon excretes ambrosia which is consumed by the sun as a manipura, the solar plexus. So the moon here refers to the brain. So the brain is nectar dripping and that feeds the solar plexus. The brain is the region of the crown chakra, obviously, which is often symbolised by a moon or half moon. The ambrosia or divine nectar formed there flows down to the manipura, where it is consumed as fuel to sustain life. According to tradition, the bindu is located near the top of the brain towards the back of the head, sort of about there, okay. A very slight depression or pit is found there, which is said to contain a small amount of liquid secretion. Within this pit there is a slight elevation, the exact location of the bindu in the physiological structure, and cranial nerves emanate from this point. So here I have a little bit of my own experience. It was a revelation to me reading about this for my talk. About 5 years ago, roughly, I suffered from severe insomnia and developed certain physical symptoms. One was distressing sensation and pain in various parts of my head. I also developed a sore patch on the top back of my head. There is a dip there and even a small, like a little pimple in the middle of it, which must be this elevation in the base. I still need to put something under my head when lying on my yoga mat in classes. I can't lie on a hard surface. It's still sore. I felt it this morning. I couldn't find the dip as easily as usual, but when I went to the centre where I thought it was, it hurt. It was sore. So I've still got that. So I'm certain, I think it's obviously got something to do with the cranial nerves, you know, that strange, horrible, strange sensation. Because if the cranial nerves come from there, all down through the head, that I realise now what happened then. Of course, the doctors didn't have a clue what it was. So anyway, those horrible feelings have long since gone. I've just got the sore head. And I also didn't notice any liquid secretion in that dip there. Right. So my pen friend Reg, some of you might know I've got a pen friend who's been in prison for forever and ever seemingly. He was in solitary confinement for 20 years, in which he spent much time in meditation. And he wrote to me, he said, I'm so lucky to have this time on my own to do all these things. He has kept this up in the last 8 years since he's come out of solitary, and he also attends yoga classes. When I told him what this lecture was going to be called and some of the topics to be covered, he wrote back that of late he has been getting a sweet taste sometimes in his throat when meditating and wondered if it were nectar. So, maybe. Now for a look at wells. Holy wells the world over are places of sanctity, peace and healing. Water was sacred as it is a basic life-enhancing substance, essential for all life. Our ancestors could sense more than that. They saw within the wells and springs gods, goddesses, or the spirit of the well, to whom sacrifices or offerings were made in return for favours or for healing. Even in Yorkshire, somebody we know, she's written this book on Yorkshire wells. She called them holy wells. And just loads and loads and loads. I mean, Yorkshire is the biggest county, but still, it's amazing how many of these holy wells there are. So, in Norse mythology, Odin visits Mimir's well and asks for a drink. HBB says, Mimir drew the highest knowledge from the fountain because the world was born of water. Hence primeval wisdom was to be found in that mysterious element. But Odin had to sacrifice an eye which sank deep in the water. It is presumed that Odin only had 2 eyes, and old artwork shows him left with only 1 eye. Sacred writings of many peoples refer to a time when humanity possessed a 3rd eye, organ of intuition, which according to Theosophical, HPB writes about this, it retreated inside the skull millions of years ago, where it remains as a pineal gland. I think she says something like, you know, we lost that organ of intuition. You know, at a cost. We learnt other things, but we lost that. Although Odin was now all-wise, he was sad and oppressed, for he had gained an insight into the future, such as the death of his son Balder, and the Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, and had become aware of the fleeting nature of all things. Mimir's well is sometimes shown as a cauldron, and mythologies are replete with cauldrons, including the Gundestrup cauldron. I don't know if you've heard of it, which is a huge embossed silver gilt bowl found in a Danish peat bog in 1891. It dates from the 1st to the 4th century and is thought to have been made in Gaul, possibly by both Celts and Thracians. On the cauldron is Cynthis, a horned god who impregnated Mother Earth. Autumn and spring ceremonies were performed to ensure his return. On the cauldron, he is shown wearing a torque necklace. That's the one sort of C-shaped with 2 round... I've got one at home. I think I must have thrown it out, you know, in the downsizing. What a shame. So anyway, he's wearing one of these. It's said to be a symbol of nobility, and he holds another, possibly with which to marry the goddess, who is also on the cauldron. And Cynthis holds a serpent, symbolic of wisdom. He is even sitting in yogic meditation and surrounded by animals and vegetation. And if anybody would like to have a look at the picture of him, I've got a nice little book here about the cauldron. Whilst talking about cauldrons and wells, it is a good time to mention oracles. Oracles were thought to be portals through which the gods spoke directly to people. They were different from seers who interpreted signs sent by the gods. Apart from Pythia, the priestess to Apollo at Delphi, there are examples in many countries in the world, including India, where the oracle was known as Akashvani, a person without body or unseen. Another symbolic container is the Holy Grail. It has been seen in many tales as an object of a spiritual quest portrayed in various forms. The aim is enlightenment or union with the divine. The Grail is usually to be found in a far-off place, surrounded by or deep in water. And it first appears when the uncle of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea, collected the blood of Jesus in a cup. And stories say the cup was brought to Glastonbury or taken to France. It becomes part of the Arthurian legends, the Fisher King tales, and many more legends. I'm sure you've heard about them. Joseph Campbell, authority on world mythologies, tells us that during the war between God and Satan, I'm not sure when that was, way back in time, some angels side with God and some side with Satan, and the Grail was brought down through the middle by the neutral angels. I saw this picture presumably online somewhere, a beautiful picture of the angels, both the angels on the side, and there's this wonderful image in the side of these absolutely luminous angels bringing down this Grail through the middle, and it was such a lovely picture and I couldn't find it, so I decided not to do any illustrations. Anyway, this represents that spiritual path that is between pairs of opposites, between fear and desire, good and evil. And the Grail, Campbell says, becomes that which is attained and realised by people who have lived their own lives. It is the fulfilment of the highest spiritual potentialities of human consciousness. Geoffrey Hodgson wrote a bit about the elixir of life, and I found this interesting because it refers to something which I'd never quite noticed or thought about. He said, the aim of the yogi is not only to realise the Atma and its unity with Para-Atma, but to be filled to overflowing with Atma, so that the whole body, down to the physical body, is hypercharged with the white fire and power of Atma. This is the meaning of the phrase describing the adept as a white pillar in the voice of the silence. That's what I'd never noticed, or never thought about. He standeth now like a white pillar to the west, upon whose face the rising sun of thought eternal poureth forth its first most glorious waves. Atma is the food of the adept in both the mystical and occult sense. Mystically, he abides in pure being, beyond thought, beyond form, and stainless. Occultly, he becomes charged with the atmic fire and power which keeps him ever young. The Atma is the true elixir of life, the fountain of eternal youth. The vital glow is a combination of prana and Atma. But Atma is part of us, isn't it? There for the taking, goodness. So I was quite surprised by that. Oh, wonderfully surprised by that. In ancient China, many emperors sought the fabled elixir with varying results. There was both a mythological white hare and a moon rabbit in Chinese folklore, both making the elixir of life with a pestle and mortar on the moon. Now these are based on pareidolia. Have you heard the word pareidolia? Some of you will have. You know, when you look at the clouds and you say, oh look, there's a dog there. And in our front room we've got these very flowery curtains and I see all sorts of strange faces. Really weird. So it's when you can see something in nature or whatever. That's pareidolia. So the Chinese looked at the moon and saw this rabbit and this hare on the moon. This spread to other Asian cultures with varying beliefs about what should be pounded and imbibed. And these powders were taken for good health, longevity and immortality. However, many substances such as mercury, sulphur and arsenic were rather deadly. But their favourites seem to have been jade, cinnabar and hematite. No, hematite, isn't it? Yeah. So, we've looked at quite a few ways in which inspiration is described as coming to those who are ready to receive it. They're all quite sweet things, aren't they? Well, they're all sweet things. Nectar, mead, ambrosia, all these things. Inspiration gives us the tools we need to develop intuition. Theosophical Rohit Mehta wrote, "We call anything that transcends normal consciousness intuition. Intuition is tuition from within." I'm just going to break off there from Rohit and say it can be seen as intuition, from within, but also you can see it as being intuition, like inspiration. Peter Barton says it's breathing in. So breathing in tuition from outside, but it's still from sort of a higher dimension, whichever way round you look at it. So it's intuition from within or intuition coming in from without. As intuition is a different dimension of consciousness, a movement from thought to intuition is discontinuity. I had a great difficulty when I read Rohit Mehta because he kept coming up with this idea that there was a discontinuity, and I found it quite hard. But just reading that, I suddenly realised that there's a change in dimension, from intuition to consciousness is a change there. It is only in this interval or the gap in the thought process that intuition comes, and it comes in a flash, in a timeless moment. Paul Brunton says that the spiritual nature can only be attained intuitively, not by the intellect, emotions or physically. I'm just going to add here a bit from Geoffrey Hodgson about the significance of wine and vineyards in the Bible. It kind of came a bit late on, so I'm adding it here. Where Christ is present in stories, it indicates that spiritual wisdom, intuitiveness, love and compassion are already well developed and active in the personal nature. Under such conditions, the water, symbol of the desire aspects of the emotions, becomes transmuted into the wine of spiritual wisdom. It is a natural process which occurs when a steadfast aspirant finds and treads the narrow way. The grapes and the vine also symbolise knowledge, wisdom and comprehension of the spirit of things. As fermentation gives a certain strength to wine, so the action of the intellect upon accumulated esoteric knowledge turns it into pure wisdom, insight and deeply penetrative intuitiveness. There eventually comes an unfoldment within one of a natural spiritual grace, which may seem to come from elsewhere. It comes when space has been made for it, when we have made space for it. This grace is made up of human kindness, ready concern for others, especially those in need, and a kind of affectionate nearness which heartens people and saves them through many dark hours and loneliness. In this wonderful way, without ever knowing it, people can grow beautifully and naturally.